Good morning and welcome to the second in our seminar series on engaging with education, organized by our wonderful Kim Polgren. Kim works on supporting teenagers to engage with climate, nature, and sustainability in their lives, in their studies and future careers. And she's currently the youth educator in residence for Whiteham Woods, at Whiteham Woods. And today she's in conversation with our author and journalist, Mary Colwell, who is talking about the hot topic of the new GCSE in Natural History. So Mary and Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Cecile. Yes, I'm really delighted to introduce Mary today, who's come to talk to us about this exciting new project, the new GCSE in Natural History. So to introduce Mary, she's an author, producer and campaigner for nature. She's had articles in The Guardian, BBC Wildlife Magazine, and many other publications. And she's made documentaries for BBC Natural History Unit and for various on radio too, and has published 3 books, including Curlew Moon, which I'm currently rereading, I recommend it, about her curlew conservation work. And recently out a book called Beak, Tooth and Claw, which is an exploration of our conflicted relationship with the predators in our countryside. What I've really loved about Mary's work is how she integrates science into storytelling and therefore brings the results of painstaking research work by you guys, by the academics, to a wide audience. She's won a number of awards for her conservation work, and including one from the BTO for outstanding science communication. And of course, this is such an important role because it's vital that the amazing work that our researchers do gets into the public domain. So this new GCSE in Natural History is Mary's brilliant brainchild, for which she's campaigned for nearly 10 years, working with the exam board OCR, which you'll be familiar with, and with Caroline Lucas from the Green Party. It seems as if the campaign is about to be successful. There's a draft outline curriculum. The consultation has received huge positive response, and it's now with the Department for Education, where it seems to be slightly stuck, but we're hoping it'll be unstuck soon. So Mary, we're so pleased that you're with us today. Really looking forward to hearing from you about this project.
Thank you very much. It's a real honour to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So our format is that I've got some questions for Mary, and we'd love to have comments and questions from our lovely audience. So please do put them in the chat or stick up your hand, and I'll aim to spot them, and Carlin will be keeping an eye on these for us so that she can flag them up. Mary,
if I just briefly interrupt, it's always nice to see a few faces in this seminar, so if you're not too shy or it's not inconvenient, do feel free to switch on your cameras and have a visible audience.
Yay.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice familiar faces.
People out there.
Hi everyone.
Hi there.
Real people. Hello.
Real people.
Oh, this is nice. Almost like being live again. So Mary, I'd like to begin, if I may, asking you kind of on the behalf of researchers, if you like, how you access and use scientific research for your writing. As I said, I'm currently rereading Curlew Moon, thinking about that question, and you've got a number of references, scientific references cited in the book, the back of the book. And I'm just curious about the process by which you find what you need.
I don't think there's any blueprint for it, really. I think it really is knowing very specifically what you want to find out about, and then doing everything from just putting Google searches in to phoning up people that you know who are scientists and asking for recommendations, to trawling the internet for names that come associated with it, and just sending out lots of emails saying, you may not be exactly the right person, but could you put me on to the right person? I think you just have to be really tenacious. And I don't think it's necessarily that easy. Academia and science does tend to be hidden a bit behind these great walls of the great institutions. And as a little sort of outsider, you think no one's going to talk to me. But actually, I've never found anybody who hasn't wanted to talk. So that's a mental block, but I think it's a real one. A lot of people think you're not accessible when actually you probably are. But your work can be quite hard to access unless you're really determined to find answers. But it is there, and I've always been very sort of encouraged by the response I've got when I've approached people.
That's great. And following on from that then, from the researcher's perspective, then what would your advice be to them to get their research out into the wider world via the science communicators? How do we make that dating agency work?
Do you know, we've been having this discussion a lot recently, because one of the things I do is I chair something called the Curlew Recovery Partnership for England, which is a roundtable of big organisations and agencies and so on, all about trying to bring back this bird from extinction. And we've been talking about, how do you get the message out there? How do you tell people what's happening? How do you translate all the horrendous data that's coming in and make it something that really inspires people, that makes that actually makes them want to do something? And actually, it's not that difficult. Actually, what you have to do is realize that at heart, every single one of us is a storyteller. Every single one of us is moved by stories. So everyone, from the top of Oxford and Cambridge, to everybody else, has to be able to tell stories, and tell stories that fold in the facts in a way that presents what you want to say in something that's accessible and that touches that other part of our souls, not just this factual scientific side, but that side that wants to make sense of the world. And we've always made sense of the world through stories. So I would say storytelling is the absolute number one way to get your message out.
Right. And as we were talking about last week, less on the jargon, more on the emotion perhaps than scientists are normally used to doing.
I think, yes, I think that's always, emotion is a kind of a word that a lot of scientists find quite difficult to buy into, because science will only work if it's not wafted around on the notion of emotion, I suppose. But it is knowing what it is that makes people think, oh, that's interesting. That means something to me. So it's not so much emotional as meaningful, I think is a better word.
Yes, and that's really the way to capture the hearts of teenagers. I know Yudvinda gave a talk at our local school recently. I'm sure he had some good stories to share from that. So if we turn to the GCSE, can you give our researchers some insight into what today's children do and don't get taught about natural history in school? And if there are any teachers in the audience, we'd be very pleased to hear your views too.
Yeah, well, I thought teachers would be a lot better to say what is actually taught than me. But as far as I can see, in junior school, it's a lot better than in secondary school. So in junior schools, the schools vary widely in their access to the natural world. And also it depends who the teachers are who make up the staff. But you really are pushing against an open door with young kids. So if you want to talk about the natural world, then you'll find pretty much most of them will want to engage. And I suppose that's, junior schools don't do a lot of natural history teaching, but they do quite a lot more natural history engagement. So I do think there are nature walks, or even just going into the playground, or, it depends school to school. It's not formalized, but I think it's there. And I do know the government is very keen to make that much more important in junior schools. And I think that's great. I think there is a movement towards that, and I'd like to see it a lot more formalized. But young children are naturally attracted to nature. This thing that E.O. Wilson called biophilia is very obvious in young children. The big problem is when they leave junior school and go to secondary school. And suddenly that childish fascination with the natural world stops being cool, or it stops being talked about in a way that means that it's okay to be interested, and it becomes a little bit not a little bit, it becomes sidelined. And that's underpinned by the fact that subjects don't celebrate it and don't fold it very much into what they teach. So even biology is fantastic at teaching young people about systems, about the mechanisms which keep this planet turning, like photosynthesis or whatever, pollination and so on. But it doesn't teach you about the things themselves. So biology will teach about how things work in a system, but it doesn't tell you what those things are. And that's the piece of the jigsaw that's missing. And we need to bring that back to the fore, make that something that's not something just for somebody who's a bit sad and's got no friends in the corner. It's something that's at the heart of the joy and excitement of everyday life. That's what we need to do.
Just thinking about that gap then for those older kids. When I was that age, I was watching David Attenborough all the time. Are today's teenagers, do you think, are they, because they're not getting any of this in school, are they not watching what the BBC Natural History Unit is pushing out? You know, the Steve Backshall, Chris Packham, all of that. Are they not reaching those?
No, they love it. They absolutely love it. And in fact, there was statistics from a couple of years ago that more people watch Blue Planet 2, I think, than watch The X Factor, more young people. And David Attenborough was voted the coolest man on the planet, wasn't he, by that stage? So it's not as though the interest goes away. I just don't think it's encouraged. It's not made the most of. It's not drawn out of us. So yes, there's certainly a huge interest from young people in natural history. And we only have to see all the sort of activity around XR and the biodiversity crisis and climate crisis to know that they absolutely do care. And I think it's a failing of the older people that we're not providing that information they so desperately need in a way that they can access, that it means something and that's useful and formalized.
So why do you think GCSE rather than another approach for these kids?
Simply because it puts it into the school system. Simply because that is the only way that at the moment we can get it into the school system in a formal way. You know, it means that every school has the option to take it. So we're not just targeting posh schools, you know, public schools, people with money, people with schools that are near national parks or whatever. Every single school in the middle of the city, right out into the wilds, will have access to a qualification for those young people that want to take it further. That's why GCSE.
And what's in it? We know what's in it yet.
Things are in it. What's in it? The whole premise of it is to get young people to name, observe, record, monitor, collect data about the natural world around them. That's the very core of it. There's lots more things to add on around that, but the core are those, so that you can look out of your window wherever you are and say, I know what that is. I know how it behaves. I know when in the year to expect it. I now need to go and observe it and learn those skills, those field skills of observation, which we've lost very largely. I need to know how to monitor and collect data, which is actually meaningful data, which can contribute to you guys in the universities. It's real hardcore citizen science that we want to train people to do. So it's about knowing the life around you, but it's also beyond that. It's about knowing the life around you and how that life translates into the wider community. So I'm here in Bristol. How does the stuff that I see out of my window, and I live right in a city centre, so how does the wildlife that I see out of my window relate to the wider wildlife of the West Country? And how does the West Country fit into the various different parts of England and then the United Kingdom and Ireland and beyond into Europe? How do we all fit from the local to the regional to the global? That's what it needs to do, to get those threads shooting out. So you understand where you live, you understand what you're looking at, you understand how things fit together. And only then can you start to sort of build up a picture of what needs to be done. But the ability to have the field craft, to observe and monitor, record and collect data is so important for the future. To work with messy data. The world isn't a laboratory. It's a big, messy, organic, unpredictable place. To be able to deal with that information, put it into a form that's usable and be able to interpret that data. Those skills are so varied and so complex and so useful for lots of different things. So that's the core of it. But a side of it, which I would be really keen to develop, is also how that natural history has been part of our cultural lives ever since we know about. From cave art, I know there's been a series on recently on art and nature, from cave art right through to AI and computer. We use the natural world to talk about ourselves, to reflect our own thoughts and feelings. We've used it to inspire music, art, poetry. That's a really, for me, an important part of it too. So it's got these very disparate but tied together elements.
I love that interdisciplinary approach to it. There's some interesting comments here. Somebody said, hi, I'm a biology teacher, 13 to 18-year-olds. Very little is taught about the natural world. Notable how little is related to British wildlife. And pre-U is better. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Also,
true. So I just say, I mean, my son is actually, my youngest son is actually doing a biology degree at the moment at Imperial. And he was saying it's so frustrating all the way through. They just don't get taught about things. They don't get taught about wildlife. So they know about the sort of reproduction mechanisms of, or, you know, how the sort of a wetland and how it needs these frogs and so on, but they can't name anything in it. And that naming of things is so important, you know, that relationship you get. So yeah, so I agree with that. There's a lot of biology, not a lot of natural history.
Yes, and I think some of that comes from the teachers, who many of whom come from more of a human biology, biochemistry background. And the small sample of teachers I've had in the woods over the last year, a lot of them are saying they don't know natural history, they can't name the trees, they can't answer the kids' questions, and so that makes them feel, you know, in a position they don't want to be. You know, they want to be the expert. So there's a job there to be done to support teachers in this as well.
And I think there's an element of that that's very important, that we also feel quite embarrassed that we don't know. So and so we ought to know. I mean, we ought to know that that's an oak tree and that's an ash tree, that's a blue tit, that's a grey tit. We ought to know that, but no one tells you. So unless you make the effort to go and find out yourself, that information isn't provided for us. So there's a real sort of a bit of embarrassment as well, and we need to get rid of that. Give people the information they need, give teachers the information they need to have the confidence, so everybody learns together. And I think that's a really new way of doing it. I think it's just not me, the great teacher, teaching you. It's a kind of an sort of exciting journey for us all to be on, really.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Somebody also said, I'm interested to hear how the GCSE can be implemented in urban schools.
Yeah.
Access to the outdoors. I know that's been a really interesting topic to discuss.
And I actually think that's a great question, because as I just said, I live in the centre of Bristol. I mean, I live by the bus station. You know, you couldn't get more urban than me. And so when I came up with the idea and was thinking it through, it was the kids that live in the council flats that are just actually towards the end of my road that I had in mind. That how do we bring the natural world to these people who walk up and down the streets? There's a secondary school, you know, quarter of a mile away up there, and they walk up and down right through the city centre every day. But the thing is, there is a lot of natural history in cities. And in fact, quite often there's more natural history in cities than there is out in some of the sort of green deserts of our countryside at times. There are flowers by the side of the road we like to call weeds. There are birds on the bird table. There are birds migrating over. There are trees down streets. There are city parks. There's quite a lot. There are ponds and so on. So I think it's a myth that there's no natural history in the city. And in fact, it's fantastic to be able to highlight the natural history in the cities and have people who understand it and want to campaign to get more in there. So I think the cities are a real heartland for this GCSE.
There's that lovely campaign, isn't there, where people are writing in chalk on walls with a pointing to write this weed.
Yeah.
Growing in the wall is this, which I understand is illegal, but people are doing it anyway.
Illegal.
That's crazy, isn't it? It's vandalism.
It's illegal to know the name of that flower.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some great comments coming in here. I'm not quite sure whether people want me to read them or not. So somebody, Alison asked, could you speak a little about the process of getting your idea of the GCSE to a curriculum that's now in front of the Department for Education? The pain.
With an awful lot of pain, I would like to point out. Thank you. I don't know where the idea came from. It was one of those, you know, kapow moments where a sort of flash of light comes down from the sky or something. It felt a bit like that anyway. But I happened to be sitting in a conservation meeting with Tony Juniper, and Tony Juniper, who's now head of Natural England, but wasn't at the time. And I remember just turning to him and saying, Tony, what do you think about GCSE in natural history? And he went, oh, what a great idea. And he got really excited. And he went back and he wrote an article for The Guardian about it. And it got a flurry of excitement and lots of people sort of said things about it, and then it just died a death because I didn't actually know what to do. So I started to sort of I tried, I just sort of made a little leaflet and I sent it around to everybody I knew and whatever. And it got a kind of flurry. I wrote to David Attenborough about it and he wrote back saying, great idea, good luck with it, that kind of thing. But to get beyond the people saying it was a nice idea, it was really hard. So it just sort of kind of sat there and I got distracted by other things. Then I picked it up again in 2018 and I put out a petition on one of these government.gov.uk petitions. Got lots and lots, immediately got lots of response. And within 2 weeks, I got over 10,000 signatures, but then it was pulled because of Theresa May's snap election. You can't have petitions running during an election season. So it got pulled, but just crept over the amount of people signing it to get a response from the government. And after 10,000, you get an official response. And the official response said, we have no plans for another GCSE. We do believe there's plenty of nature in the curriculum. So no, basically, get back in your box. So that was a bit disappointing. And again, I didn't quite know what to do. And then all of a sudden, this angel from heaven came down, fluttered down through the internet and sent me a message on Twitter. And it was Caroline Lucas. She sent me a personal message saying, love this, let me know if I can help. And because she is such a good and wily and astute politician, she managed to get us in front of the Secretary of State for the Environment, who at that time was Michael Gove. And Michael Gove was incredibly encouraging. And I have to say, he was great, really, really good. He'd read all the stuff I'd sent him. I could see, because he was holding it, he'd marked up things. And when I said something, he said, oh yes, on page something. So he'd actually read it, which was amazing. Then he eventually got us in touch with OCR. And then the rest was just finding the right person in OCR to agree, and which was Tim Oates. And they've been fantastic. And the rest then is history. So it's all ready to go. We've had the public consultation. There's a whole sort of series of hoops you have to go through. All that has been done, and it is now just sitting on the desk of the Secretary of State and the Minister for Schools and the Secretary of State for Education. And all we need is for them to say yes, and we're off. The rest has been done.
Good luck. Yes. Cecile, you've got your hand up.
Thanks. Well, just as you were saying, it's all ready to go. And my question is about, so I think many of my colleagues would be really interested in engaging with the content, with the curriculum. And how can they do that? Is it possible to, you were just saying it's all ready to go, and I'm sure there's still room for working with the content in the curriculum. Is it possible to review it, or to add ideas, or to submit ideas?
Oh, for sure. I mean, at the moment, when I say it's ready to go to the stage of populating it. So the outline is there, how it'll be examined, all the sort of nuts and bolts of how it will work are there, but the actual content still needs to be developed. So as soon as we get a yes, then we'll start formalizing that process and inviting people to contribute. So yes, of course, we'll welcome help with that. We just need that yes.
Okay, and we'll make sure to communicate the way how to engage with it through the Biodiversity Network.
Absolutely, and the way to do that is to get in touch with OCR, Tim Oates and myself. We are starting, we've got quite a long list now of people ever since we got going offering to help. So the more the merrier, honestly. Thank you for that.
I know OCR were recruiting recently, and then that recruitment has stopped now. Is that because they've got enough people, or they are still looking for people?
I think we're just waiting. I mean, there's no point doing too much more until we know. I mean, we are at a stage now where we're oven ready, but to do more, we might just sort of, if they say no, it's a great big disappointment, isn't it? A lot of people let down.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I should say that with my Whiteham hat on, I've started a website where I'm collecting resources which would be used for hopefully by teachers and students at the point at which we're ready to both train teachers, which should be the year before we start teaching, hopefully, as we're all learning together, and then use for students going forward. So yeah, we'd be looking for contributions to that. If you've got a way of which your work can be translated into something that we can use for teenagers, that would be fantastic, and can certainly help do that. So we're just populating that website.
OCR have been collecting resources that they know are out there already, which will support teachers as well. So if anybody does have, I don't know, field identification or field skills or whatever it is, help, all that's going to be really, really useful. So we are collecting that at the moment.
I think the Natural History Museum, the London one, is also doing some work on that, isn't it? Yes. So there are people collecting resources. Yes. Of course, there are a lot of resources. A lot of them actually focused on primary age kids, and so slightly need to be adapted for older ones so they don't feel too young, but actually they're really good resources. They just need slightly different graphics or something. So there's a job of work to be done there. I'm sure the publishers will be all over it with a textbook very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
For sure. So, there is, if anybody else wants to ask a question, I've slightly lost a handle on the chat now, so Colin and Cecile might have want to pick out something in particular. I'll leave a moment for that. Anybody wants to ask a question?
I saw there was a good question from Jeppe. It was...
Certainly. Yeah, thanks. I can ask it. Yeah, so thanks, Mary. This is all very interesting. I was just wondering, I think I've had a similar joy being a physical geographer, you know, going into the field of being able to interpret landscape features and translate that into different geomorphological processes or whatever. So I was just wondering whether geodiversity, as people like to call it these days, is that part of this as well, or is it strictly biology focused?
Do you mean landscape diversity? And
yeah, and
it kind of feels more geography to me, but physical geography. But you know, creatures, wildlife lives in places, and so you have to understand the places they live. So in that way, yes, of course, you know, you need the flowers on top of mountains will live there for a reason, and different to the flowers that live down in lowland wetlands. So yes, in terms of understanding the place, these things live in places. So yes, that would definitely be an interesting part of it. But the focus is on wildlife and how that's supported and what it needs. Excellent.
The first theme in the GCSE that was on the consultation document was called the natural shaping of the world. And one of those bullets was why the landscapes are as they are. So we're very much looking at it, weren't you, from the perspective?
I have to say, as a
ground up,
that was something that's very close to my heart, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And Emma's got her hand up. Emma Gardner.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my question was kind of related to that. So one of the big problems that I see when I'm talking to policymakers or consultancy type people is this lack of understanding of how things are connected to the land, how things can only live in particular places. And the whole sort of net gain idea comes out of the fact that people don't understand that you simply can't move nature out of the way, because we have ourselves become so disconnected and floating. We move around, we have very little connection to our natural world. And we therefore have forgotten that actually other things don't exist like that. So it would be really great if this could kind of address those massive kind of educational deficiencies that I see when I'm talking to adults these days who are wanting to get involved in net gain or biodiversity stuff, and yet they fundamentally don't understand the way the natural world works. So it would be fantastic if this could kind of plug that gap.
I couldn't agree more, Emma. And I think we see this the whole time with planning applications, that it's okay, you can build some houses there because we'll just create a wetland over there. You know, and that wetland over there is completely unsuitable for what was using the wetland in this place. And I see it a lot with the work I do in curlews, that a lot of the ecological consultancy is almost astonishingly naive about the natural world, but really good on process. And so I couldn't agree more. It's a little bit like, we want everyone out there to be, let me give you an analogy. We want everybody in the country to be really expert French chefs, you know, but most of the country doesn't even know what an egg is. So it's as though we're trying people to be really competent at complex things like ecological consultancy, without having these very basic building blocks of what is there and what does it need to survive, and why is it there and why isn't it over there, you know. So those very basic things, it's like trying to understand Shakespeare, but we haven't even got off Janet and John or whatever the first readers are these days. It's that kind of, you're right, we're missing those basic building blocks and we've gone too high into the process too quickly.
Thank you. Henry.
Thank you, Mary and Kim, and thank you for talking on this topic, Mary. I was wondering if I know that what you've described so far is sort of very pure natural history, but I was wondering if there was any scope to include sort of applied elements, particularly around different conservation practices. I know that most of the kids nowadays, they have no formal education. Maybe it's covered a tiny bit in the biology A level nowadays, but what is rewilding? What is habitat restoration? What do we need for the future of the countryside? Where is it suitable to do these different things? What was the historic baseline? What is it like now? Where should we be aiming for in the future? And elements like that.
Yeah, those are all really, really good questions, but I would say those were questions, a lot of the topics that you just mentioned there. So take, for example, rewilding. I mean, boy, what a political thing that is, you know. And so I think what the government is very nervous of is that this will become a sort of conservation GCSE with all the different political things associated with that. And I think that's a real, and I do think that's a real danger, because working again, like I do with curlews, that, you know, that there's a lot of politics behind and agendas behind things. So people with very different worldviews will have completely different attitudes to what should happen. And so who decides what should happen? And then we're in a different world altogether. So my idea was just to give people, whoever you are, whatever your cultural background, whatever sort of part of society you come from, you have the basic building blocks to make up your own mind in a factual, sound way. So to teach conservation, I think, is not what this is about, but to have the understanding to know of all the different sorts of conservation out there. Where do you, with your knowledge now, where do you naturally feel you want to choose to put that, your efforts? That's how I think of it. Yeah, if that makes sense. But you mentioning rewilding is an absolute classic one there.
Mm. Yeah, we have to be aware that teachers operate in an environment where they have to be really, really careful about politics. And the government put out an edict just a couple of days ago, clamping down even further on. It was on white privilege. In fact, you can't say it's a fact. That's this sort of thing, you know. So they have to be very, very wary. But I'm sure any child who is doing this course would automatically be spun into the whole sort of conservation.
Oh, you won't be able to avoid it.
And, yeah,
you won't be able to avoid it, but to teach what to do is a different thing. To highlight the various options out there is one thing. To say that's the right option is a political decision, and that's where people get very nervous.
Thank you. Olivia, you had your hand up.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this, Mary. This is incredible that you've brought it this far.
Thank you.
I just wondered what you would expect of a teacher who wants to teach it. Would it be A-level or degree level geography or biology?
Ideally, yes. I think in reality most teachers would be drawn from those, but anybody with a passion for natural history that knows what they're talking about would be really good. I mean, a lot of the people that I work with are not trained in biology or geography or anything. They just love nature and have learned a lot about it. I'm not really up on enough what schools need and what qualifications you need to do what, so I don't want to sort of say anything that I don't know anything about. But it seems natural to me that biology and geography teachers would take the sort of most of this going. If we do manage to get the cultural aspect through, of course, then wouldn't it be fantastic if English literature taught, a lot more to do with how nature's influenced writing through time and so on. So whoever has that passion would be great, would be fantastic.
Incredible. Yeah, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, wouldn't it be?
Some of my excitement about this GCSE is the interdisciplinary nature. Schools, as you people probably realise, are very siloed at the moment. You'll have a department of biology who won't even talk to the department of geography at the moment. Whereas if this GCSE is going to be taught by teachers from different disciplines, that's a major challenge for schools, but also perhaps a really good opportunity for the schools that embrace it.
I find it all very, very strange that schools have developed like this in a way, because we know as individuals that we are not one thing. We are everything. We are sons and daughters, mothers and fathers. We're consumers. We're activists. We're, lovers. We're everything. And yet suddenly in school, you're kind of hammered down and confined and boxes put around you. But the world isn't like that. And the more you know about natural history, it isn't like that. Nothing's got a box around it. As John Muir said, paraphrasing because I never remember the exact quote, you tug on a flower and you pick a flower and you're tugging on everything else in the universe. Everything else is sort of interconnected. And although that can feel messy, to lose that concept of interconnectivity would be a tremendous tragedy for us. For our own being, as well as just making the right decisions out in the real world.
Yeah, this I think has the potential to be really interesting and useful. I think teacher training is going to be something significant. I've had a number of teachers saying, where will it sit and how will I get trained? Because we've already discussed that teachers don't feel particularly well up on this sort of thing. There's an interesting comment in the chat about worrying that it'll be a niche subject, and I think that's another risk as well. My son's school, they do GCSE astronomy, as Jackie mentions, and it's done as an after school, and the kids start taking it and then they drop off at the end of term 2. And where will it sit in the whole panoply of GCSE? You have to do your 6, and then you've got 3 or 4 more to choose. Is it a science? Is it not a science? There's going to be challenges, definitely. Lorna, you've got your hand up.
Hi, morning everyone. So actually my question follows on, I think, from what Emma asked, and the previous questions kind of touched on it. So this GCSE actually really almost interests me. For me, I would like to take this GCSE, but I'm also a teacher and I would love to teach this GCSE, but I fall into the category of being the person that doesn't recognize the egg. Like, I would love to be able to, but how, I don't know whether in developing this GCSE, you're also in parallel developing how it would be that we could train up teachers sufficiently so that we have enough teachers to be able to offer this GCSE, and what that would look like, how I could maybe tap into it, for example.
Yeah, for sure. I think teacher training is an absolutely fundamental part of it, and it will build and grow once the GCSE gets underway. So hopefully it's only a kind of temporary problem, really, because in a few years' time we'll all be amazing naturalists, so it won't be a problem. But totally, which is why all the resources are being collected to help teachers, and I'm sure, and I need to talk to Tim about this more carefully, but training will be offered to teachers who want to do it. And I think the Field Studies Council, for example, is a very, very good way of being able to teach teachers. So online courses, I could imagine, and Kate, let me spin off here, let me riff on this for a minute. What I would love is for the country's best naturalists to do a series of online seminars, with things in front of them, showing you what this looks like, naming it, showing the bits you need to look about, bringing it alive. When you sit with a naturalist who actually loves what they do, I'll do it about curlews. Let me wow you with curlews at some point. You will want to go out there and find curlews and talk about it, and suddenly this subject will come absolutely alive. And I would love to have a whole series of those, so teachers have access to online resources that are to do with insects, plants, trees, beetles, whatever it is. I would absolutely love that. And one of my plans would be to get big national funding to put those whole series of seminars on. So if Oxford want to help me do that, that would be fantastic. An online natural history teaching channel to teach the teachers, to teach all of us. Wouldn't that be great? But that's my plan. But yes, before my grand plan finds the funding to do it, there will be teacher training offered.
I've talked to several teacher training providers. So I talked to Oxford University to do secondary, and they said they wouldn't add it as a separate subject, but they would look to adding it into the biology and geography teaching of teachers. And I'm a governor on our local initial teacher training, and they said they would potentially consider it as a separate subject to teach. So there is hope there. And I think a lot of sort of informal providers, so at White and Woods, you know, one of the things we would really like to be doing is helping teachers develop their skills. And I think lots of sort of local wildlife organisations could be brought together to offer teachers support in that way.
And I think that Britain is, I think Britain is really, really good at this. I mean, we have wildlife organisations right across the country. You know, the more wildlife societies that you can poke a stick at in this country, and we are so fortunate that we have so many dedicated wildlife organisations. So the wildlife trusts, I can't remember, everybody's within 5 miles of wildlife trust reserve or something, you know. Then there are the people associated with those big organisations who do have the skills to help. So it will be, I'm sure, a mix and match depending on where you are. What's the best solution for training teachers in your area, but there is the expertise out there.
Just as a continuation of that, is there the website that was shared on the chat, would all the information about teacher training also be linked to that website, or would we need to go elsewhere to find that information?
I think it's not available yet. I think that's a wait and see.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's quite early in the process. Emma said that, natural history people, natural historians have their specialisms and teachers can't be specialists. So yes, it is definitely, there's got to be that kind of generalism, natural history. And then, but I know with the naturalists that I meet up at Whiteham that they do have their specialisms, but then they also are generalists as well. So yes, we teachers become those generalists without expecting them to become, entomologists or bird people or whatever. There's Jenny. I know you made a great comment on the chat. You've got your hand up.
Yes, hello, good morning everyone. So just start by saying I didn't know anything about the plans for this GCSE. I just saw it on Twitter this morning and just thought, wow, this is amazing. So I find myself here, and thank you so much for making this happen. So basically we run a charity called Science, Art and Writing, and we go into primary schools traditionally where we do cross-disciplinary projects with scientists, artists and writers, and we always find it's difficult to then continue that through and go into secondary schools. And it's not because secondary school teachers don't want to do it, but they often say they can't fit it in because the curriculum is so siloed. And so I think actually having a natural history GCSE will really break down a lot of barriers. So I think this is just amazing. So that was my point in the chat, but just picking up on what you were saying about rewilding and how careful we have to be about being political or sort of trying to lead people's opinions and that sort of thing. We've actually just put together some resources called Conscious Consumers. So we're doing different topics that we found that teenagers were finding out about often on social media in sort of throwaway statements by, from a David Attenborough, not throwaway statement, but from like a celebrity to David Attenborough. It's like, somebody who knows everything about the topic to somebody who knows very little about the topic, and they don't know how to filter that information. And sometimes it is put together in a very emotional way. And so we kind of felt we need to give them sort of access to the facts about these things, but not in a way that we're leading them to make a decision. So I think it's really interesting how that's going to play out in a natural history degree to make it not a conservation degree GCSE. So I just wanted to just say that we've started to work on those topics, and it's tricky, but it's definitely doable, and it's so needed. So hopefully that
thank you for that.
Help. Okay.
Thanks for joining today. And
thank you.
I think you're exactly right. I think everyone's got an opinion now because social media's allowed this, and it's very easy to get emotionally carried away with something because some people are really good at whipping up emotion, and that's why we have to be a sort of as wise as serpents and gentle as doves, I suppose. When you go into this, just know what you're talking about, just know the facts, and then you can pick your way through it. And it's, I've I have been the target of quite a lot of hate, and it's really unpleasant. And that a lot of it was from people who didn't even understand what I was saying. So you're right, it's too easy to whip up emotion. And what we need now, more than we've ever needed before, are people who know what they're talking about and who can make calm and wise decisions in a very fractious world. And as this climate emergency gets more serious, as the biodiversity crisis gets more serious, we're going to need real solid people to make really good decisions about the future. And at the moment, we are lacking the skills to be able to do that. But we can put it right so quickly if we just start training young people now. It's not a difficult thing. It's not as though we've got to persuade people to do it, like we've just heard, but we do need to get that information out there in the right way. I completely agree with you.
Thank you. Kaya and Yadvinda, got your hand up.
Yes, I've just been talking with Kaya, who's a GCSE student, about some of these points, and one was around you referred to geography earlier, and as somebody who's passionate about geography, and there may be geography teachers on this audience, so my apologies. I find the curriculum quite disappointing and actually demotivating. And Kaya, I don't know whether you want to elaborate about what you think of things that we want to avoid with natural history.
Yeah, I feel like geography is so much more about learning facts, at least in the curriculum, than it is about understanding the processes. And I feel like that kind of don't want the natural history GCSE to fall into the same thing, like just memorizing the names of plants and insects, and actually learning about the processes more. Because I don't know, I think memorizing things gets really boring because that's all you do in GCSE, really.
You're so right. No, I don't want it to just be about memorizing either. I think I really don't. I want it to be that's just knowing the name of something is just the start of getting to know something, isn't it? So it's a bit like having friends, isn't it? You know their name. Oh, that's John. But John doesn't mean anything until you know who John is. And I think that's the journey that we want to go on with the wildlife around us. That out there is the natural world, to me, is it's just a storybook of wonder. And when we're so sort of concerned about big issues, we tend to lose sight of wonder and joy and what all that multi-layered meaning that things can give you. So the idea of the natural history is exactly that, is to introduce you to characters that are performing a great play out there for us all to get immersed in. That's how I like to think of it. So I definitely don't want to give the impression that this is just about naming things. This is about naming things, understanding them, have a relationship with them, knowing how they all work together, and knowing how we fit, crucially, how we fit into that picture and how we're influencing things. I think it's, you're quite right to pick up at that, so don't get the wrong impression.
And you had a comment about the conservation aspect of natural history as well.
I was saying that's the thing that I think most people are most excited about it to do with natural history, because I feel like a lot of teenagers feel quite helpless with the whole biodiversity crisis. And I think that when learning about natural history, I think tying that into conservation is quite a hopeful and exciting thing. So I don't know, I get that it shouldn't be too political, but I think it's the exciting part of the natural history GCSE in some ways.
Yeah, you're right. It really, try and think of it a little bit like doing I'm trying to give an example. If you do a GCSE in politics, you don't do a GCSE in Labour politics. You don't do a GCSE in Conservative politics. You do a degree in politics, so you understand the political landscape, and then you take that information and put it wherever you want to, to action, to whatever you feel fired up about. And that's how I see the natural history GCSE, is to giving you, if you really want to make a difference to the biodiversity crisis, first of all, find out what biodiversity is, and then get stuck in with all the conservation organisations or do your own thing or whatever. But that's the route through. So you're right. And young people are activists. We can see that all around the world at the moment. But go and be an activist with the building blocks. behind you, and then you'll be a lot more effective as well.
Thank you. And that, I think the points about the naming, I think, speaks to Emma's point earlier on. Are there any more questions? Maybe we have time for one more. There's a couple of points in the chat.
Hello. Oh, is that right if I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, if there's one in the chat that you want to ask.
No, go ahead.
Well, just, I'm really excited about the idea of, I wish I had this in school, just to the opportunity to learn more names and time dedicated towards it. And I'm now a second-year biologist, and I'd like to continue learning how to identify things and understand their relationships. But would you recommend any resources now to start learning, or would you just say get stuck in, or is there any
I mean, depends what bits are you interested in, you know. So you're interested in, I don't know, trees, you know, there's a lot of info out there. Join a natural history society. Right, you know, yeah. Where are you at university?
I'm at Oxford.
So in Oxford, then, gosh, that'd be you couldn't be in a better place. Start
Come up to Whiteton Woods. Yeah.
Yeah, go to Whiteton Woods, exactly.
But check out the app called Seek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really cool. You just pointed at things and tells you what they are. It's like having magic eyes.
Yeah, just get going. Just
really
tag on
fun
to people that know what they're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jackie, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, and I just can't agree more, and thank you to Mary for really pushing this forward with the GCSE. But I've been teaching for 25 years in secondary schools, and when children make a choice for their GCSEs, it's based quite a lot on what they've done in the 2 years beforehand. So what I'd really like to see, and I totally agree with I can't remember who's talking about this sort of science writing in primary schools, and that's sort of trying to get threads in that works really well in primary schools. When you get to secondary school, there is no time. So the only way we can really make a biggest difference and impact is to get it into the national curriculum. So Mary, don't stop at a GCSE.
No.
If you've got access to the politicians, we need to reform the national curriculum so that the English literature are teaching nature writing, British nature writing, or whatever it is, and historians are talking about it, and the geographers are talking about it, the aspects to natural history that's there in Key Stage 3. Then you can have those that want to specialise at GCSE. But I'm really worried that, you know, the 7 children that do astronomy, you know, it's still too niche, and actually it's those kids have already had a love for space. And so the kids that you're still preaching to the converted, whereas if we can get it right embedded and you get specialists teaching, you know, and get biology to teach, we can easily teach, you know, identification and monitoring and conservation. You know, I actually think you shouldn't be worried about it. There's so much good science there with wildlife corridors and with Serengeti rules, you know, or Bob Payne's work, where you can sort of see, you know, trophic cascades working brilliantly. They're great examples where you know, popping a keystone species in, or re-establishing a top predator, the knock-on effect around there. Get rid of that politicized word rewilding, you know, that causes so much anger with everybody, and it's not a useful word. But actually going back to the science, so that, as you say, it's not political, it's actually based in monitoring and science.
Yeah, it has to be based in science, but you're quite right. That natural history should just be, there's a move to green the curriculum to show how relevant it is to our lives, from the creative side to the purely scientific. You know, it is odd, isn't it, that what do we do with our young children? We tell them stories about animals all the time. We immerse them in this. They make friends with animals. They live in, you know, imaginary worlds of animals, and that's all so exciting. And then it becomes their life, and then we gradually take all that away as people grow older. And we need to make that build on that wonder that we all experience as children, and just make it move with the times and make it relevant to different age groups. And we will see a greening of the curriculum, and we will see natural history but become much more of a subject that people talk easily about, that we have an easy national conversation with the world around us. But I tell you what, I'm not going to stop at a GCSE. I keep trying to bash OCR for an A level, and I would love to see degrees in natural history. There used to be degrees in natural history. I'd like to see every university in the country have a professor of natural history. I was a very good friend of the most wonderful Aubrey Manning, who died 2, 3, 4 years ago, who had the most wonderful title on the planet. He was Professor of Natural History at the University of Edinburgh. Wow, what great title is that? We need professors of natural history in every university, and we need a proper career progression right the way through. So right with you there, but I'm having enough trouble with the GCSE. So, I think I need a few strong coffees before I start the next one.
Well, I think you've probably got some helpers in this audience if you need some support. And of course, one of the big challenges is going to be, how do we keep those kids from primary engaged from 11 to 13? Yeah. That's really important. The kids I have up at Whiteham, I find actually they are really interested up until that time, until 13 years old. After that, they're tending to fall off a bit. But again, I think those are the ones who are already really, really into it, and we're losing an awful lot over those years. Sure. So there's a lot of work to be done there, so that actually they do want to take this GCSE and haven't already gone off nature as being a childish thing. We present it to them as a childish thing, and so that it's not cool. Yeah. Nature needs to be cool again. We
need to move it on from the childish stories to the teenage stories. We need more teenage writers on natural history. Come on, writers who write for young people. We need more natural history in there.
Yeah. And the researchers really make it cool. So the summer school that I run with the Environmental Change Institute in Oxford, that we ran up at Whiteham Woods this year, just speaking to they're 16 to 18, talking to the researchers and hearing their enthusiasm and their love for this subject, and the scienciness of it really makes it very, very cool. Yeah. So it's in your hands, researchers. You have the ability to make this stuff super cool.
So true.
And draw the young people along with you.
That's so true.
We're coming to our last couple of minutes, so I just remains to say, researchers, you've been, and everybody on the audience, you've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Please keep helping. I don't know how many of you are strictly followers, but I should say keep tweeting. Use hashtag GCSE Natural History. Was trending at one time, hasn't been for a while. Let's get it trending again. If you've got snippets from your research that you'd like to sort of share for the GCSE in natural history, then, yes, send it to OCR. Again, we're putting together a website of bits and bobs. We are hoping to be able that we can actually do teacher training up at Whiteham, and perhaps be teaching it as an extracurricular subject, not just to GCSE age people, but perhaps to all ages. Sarah pointed out on the chat that Whiteham was in part given to the university to brighten the minds of children, and we need to keep on doing that. Mary, thank you so much for everything you do for conservation and for science communication. Please keep on doing it. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughtfulness today. I'm sure we're all rooting for this new GCSE in natural history and an A level and whatever else we can do to try and solve this blooming problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Back over to you, Cecile. Bye-bye. And Carlin.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you, Kim, for organising this. It's been wonderful. It's all being recorded, so I'll send it around the network afterwards, and everybody can watch bits if they miss stuff at the end. And some great questions and comments in the chat as well. So I will download that and send that to you. But if everybody just follows us on the Biodiversity Network website, they'll be able to see when the next talks are. So really exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.